the rest home. It was explained to me that good deeds and relationships with others contribute to our spiritual growth. I was very surprised to find, on that spiritual plane, a complete representation of the Orthodox religion. In the spiritual world, every doctrine naturally retained its own beliefs and distinctive ceremonies, just as on earth, with few differences. This spiritual slumber is nothing new in this world. The fault lies with earth. Religious controversies and disputes are at the heart of the ignorance and lack of knowledge that many people carry with them into the spirit world, and if these people's minds are narrow and incapable of thinking for themselves, they remain bound to their petty religious views, regarding them as absolute truths, until the day of their spiritual awakening arrives. Then they will understand that blind adherence to their beliefs is hindering their growth. But for every person who leaves these misleading congregations for good, there will always be another who arrives to take their place, until earth comes to know the truth about the spirit world. Of course, they do no harm to anyone but themselves by delaying their spiritual development. Once they realize what they're doing and take the first step toward leaving, their joy knows no bounds, and they understand how much time they've apparently wasted. One might wonder what could replace these religious communities once the truth has been understood. No form of worship at all? Not at all. We have our own religious gatherings, but they are free from any trace of meaningless beliefs, doctrines, and dogmas. We worship God with great sincerity and absolute truth. We are one mind, and no one is called upon to blindly believe in something that is incomprehensible. There are so many things here that we do not understand, and it will take a long time before we can grasp even a small part of them. All of us here are concerned with being one mind with God, which is what all earthly people should do, after all, and, in addition, since they have a physical body, with being one body with God and earthly life as well. I was suddenly struck by a solid building situated on a tree-lined plot of land that also caught my attention. I was told that it was a rest home for those who had arrived in the spirit world after a long illness or a violent death and who, as a result, were in shock. As I approached, I could see that the building did not look at all like a hospital in the strict sense, whatever its function might be. It was built in a classical style, 3 stories tall and completely open on the sides. That is, it had no windows. It was constructed of a white material, but immediately above it was a large beam of blue light that flooded and enveloped it, giving the entire building a blue hue. This great beam was God's energy, the source of life, a healing light sent to those who had arrived but had not yet awakened. When they had fully recovered spiritually, they would experience a glorious awakening and be accompanied into their new world. I noticed that several people were sitting on the grass or walking around the building. They were the relatives of those undergoing treatment at the nursing home whose awakening was imminent. Although they could easily be found there when the time came, They preferred to follow their old earthly instincts by waiting nearby for that joyful awakening. As could be seen from the expressions on their faces, they were filled with joy and very excited. I received many friendly smiles as I walked among them. I noticed that most of the people waiting in the gardens were not wearing their earthly clothes, and I thought that most of them had been living in these lands for a long time. They told me that this was not necessarily the case. They could wear their spiritual attire by virtue of being inhabitants of this realm, and their clothes were suited to both the place and the situation. It is difficult to describe them because it is impossible to compare them to anything earthly. Here there are no fabrics as we know them, and their appearance is not determined by the weave of the fabric, but by the quality and intensity of the light that constitutes the essence of a spiritual garment. The garments I was observing were long and flowing, and the various shades of blue and pink seemed to blend into one another. They appeared very comfortable to wear and, like everything else in this place, required no effort to keep them in perfect condition, depending entirely on the spirituality of the wearer. As soon as I expressed the desire, my clothes vanished, dissolved, and I found myself dressed in my spiritual garments, just like those of the others around me. I did notice, however, that some people's spiritual garments seemed to radiate more vivid colors than mine. Now I felt perfectly at ease and natural, in harmony with the place. Nothing would have been more out of place than an earthly appearance in this building, which bore no resemblance to any on earth. An outdoor vestibule led to a room of considerable size. The space normally filled by windows was occupied by tall columns spaced at moderate intervals, and this arrangement was repeated along all four walls. The decorations were very sparse, but this should not lead one to think that the apartment had a cold or barracks-like appearance. It was anything but that. The floor was covered with soft, simply patterned rugs, and here and there, beautifully decorated panels of tapestry hung from the walls. The entire floor was occupied by comfortable sofas, on each of which lay a motionless person fast asleep. A few men and women moved about calmly, intent on observing the various sofas and their occupants. I noticed that in this environment we were under the influence of the blue ray. Its effect was highly energizing, yet at the same time it instilled a great deal of calm and serenity. Another noteworthy quality was the complete absence of any institution with its inevitable bureaucracy. There was no doubt about the proper course of action, and I never felt like a stranger among strangers. Those who watched over the sleepers seemed to be performing an act of love, happy to do so, rather than carrying out a duty. The awakening of these sleeping souls was a constant joy for them, as it was for those who had come to witness it. I learned that all the patients in this room had endured long and debilitating illnesses before their death. Immediately after their passing, they are gently guided into a deep sleep. In some cases, sleep follows physical death instantly, without interruption. Prolonged illnesses prior to death have a debilitating effect on the mind, which, in turn, negatively affects the spiritual body. While the body recovers quickly, the mind requires absolute rest for varying lengths of time. Each case is treated individually and responds perfectly to the treatment. In this state of sleep, the mind is completely at rest. There are no nightmares, fever, or delirium. As I witnessed this splendid manifestation of God's providence, I couldn't help but think of those absurd earthly ideas of eternal rest, perpetual sleep, and other equally misleading notions, such as the resurrection in a physical body preached by various religious movements like the Jehovah's Witnesses, or concepts of reincarnation, none of which have anything to do with the state of extremely prolonged torpor that the Orthodox Church teaches exists until the arrival of the dreaded Day of Judgment. Here was clear proof that this belief was nonsense. My friends told me that none of them had woken up in the nursing home. Like me, they had not suffered from debilitating illnesses, and the end of their earthly days had come quickly and peacefully. The patients resting on their couches looked very serene. They were constantly monitored, and at the first sign of an impending awakening, those waiting were summoned so that everything would be ready to welcome them.